The gentle scent of fresh blooms filled the air inside Lilah Hartley's modest little flower shop on the edge of town. The place was her sanctuary, a world of delicate petals and soft sunlight, far removed from the chaos of big cities and broken hearts. She loved her simple life in Willow Creek, where everyone knew everyone, and days passed like quiet pages in a book. It was a life without surprises until that evening. The wind outside carried the crisp bite of approaching fall, making the leaves rustle like soft whispers. Lilah was just about to close up, her hands dusted with pollen as she arranged a bouquet of white lilies, when the bell above the door chimed. She turned, expecting one of her regulars, maybe old Mrs. Carter picking up her usual roses. But instead, a sharply dressed courier in a black suit stood there, holding a glimmering envelope. "Delivery for Miss Lilah Hartley," the man said, offering it with a polite nod. Lilah wiped her hands on her apron, her brow furrowing in confusion. She hardly ever received letters, let alone ones that looked so extravagant. The envelope gleamed with a golden trim, her name etched in flawless cursive as though plucked straight from a fairy tale she didn't belong in. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers hesitating as she took it. The courier left without another word, and for a moment the shop felt too quiet, the world holding its breath. Lilah stared at the shimmering invitation, a strange weight settling in her chest. A part of her already knew this wasn't going to be good news. With trembling hands, she opened it. As her eyes skimmed the elegant lettering inside, her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. "Mr. Ethan Caldwell and Miss Sabrina Monroe request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration in New York City." She barely registered the rest. The name Ethan Caldwell blazed like fire across the page. Memories flooded her. Messy teenage kisses under the bleachers, stolen glances in crowded hallways, whispered promises of forever in the glow of sunset by the river. He was her everything, until he wasn't. When Ethan left for college, he left her too. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. And now, after all these years, here he was, not in person, but through a glittering piece of paper, inviting her to witness his life with someone else. A millionaire now, living in a world she could never touch. She clutched the invitation so tightly her knuckles turned white. Why now? Why her? The confusion twisted into anger, then melted into a hollow ache. She hadn't heard his name in years, but she hadn't forgotten him. Not really. Her first instinct was to tear it apart, throw it in the trash, and pretend it never happened. What good could come from reopening wounds she spent years trying to heal? But something stopped her. Curiosity, maybe, or defiance. Perhaps she wanted to see the man who shattered her heart, to look him in the eye and prove she was still standing. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden glow over the fields, Lilah sat by the window with the invitation resting on the table. She read it over and over, each word sinking deeper into her soul. Part of her told her this was dangerous, that she was walking straight into a storm. But another part, the braver, reckless part, wanted to face him. Why would Ethan reach out now? The question gnawed at her. He was a millionaire, engaged to some glamorous woman she didn't know. Was this pity, guilt, or something else entirely? There was an odd chill in the air, a sense that this wasn't kindness at all. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Against every instinct screaming inside her, Lilah Hartley made her decision. She would go. Not because she wanted to watch him get married, but because she needed answers. Needed to see if the boy she once loved still existed beneath the layers of power and wealth. And though she couldn't have known it yet, this wasn't going to be a reunion, it would be a reckoning. As she sealed her fate with that decision, the stars blinked to life in the night sky, indifferent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Little did Lilah know, Ethan Caldwell didn't invite her to reconnect. He invited her to humiliate her. And the cruelest part? She was walking straight into his trap. The thunderous pulse of New York City greeted Lilah Hartley like a slap to the senses. The towering skyline stretched high into the cloud-speckled sky, shimmering glass and steel reflecting the fading light of evening. The streets buzzed with energy she'd only ever glimpsed in movies. Yellow cabs zipping past, people in tailored suits with places to be, and the restless hum of a city that never slowed down. Lilah clutched her small suitcase tightly, her stomach tangled in knots as she stepped out of the cab and faced the grand hotel towering before her. The Astoria Grand. It looked less like a hotel and more like a palace carved from gold and crystal. Massive doors gleamed under the soft glow of ornate sconces, and a crimson carpet stretched toward the entrance like a velvet tongue daring her to walk its length. Her reflection in the hotel's glass doors made her hesitate. A simple blue dress, soft curls tumbling over her shoulders, no designer label clinging to her name. She wasn't like these people, and maybe she never would be. But she'd come this far, for answers, for herself. With trembling fingers, she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and followed the melodic strains of a string quartet into the grand ballroom. And there it was, a world she'd never imagined, far removed from her tiny flower shop in Willow Creek. Glistening chandeliers hung like frozen stars overhead, their countless crystals sending glittering shards of light across the room. Velvet drapes swept the high walls and the air shimmered with perfume, laughter, and the crisp clink of glasses. Eyes turned as she entered, curiosity flickering in polished gazes. She could feel it, the weight of silent judgment. Women draped in silk and diamonds whispered behind manicured hands. Men in sharp tuxedos gave quick, assessing glances, dismissing her as someone who didn't belong, and maybe she didn't. But she wouldn't let them see her break. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin in quiet defiance. I'm not here for them. And then she saw him, across the sea of glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, standing tall and breathtaking in his perfectly tailored suit, Ethan Caldwell. His dark hair still fell in those artfully tousled waves and those striking blue eyes. She recognized them instantly, even after all these years. Eyes she once knew better than her own, but now they gleamed with something sharper, colder. Satisfaction, amusement, power. Their gazes locked, and for a heartbeat the noise around her faded. The ballroom disappeared, and it was just Lilah and Ethan. The boy who once swore he loved her, now a man who looked at her like a game piece he couldn't wait to move. A flicker of nostalgia crossed his face, or maybe she imagined it, quickly replaced by a smirk so polished it almost gleamed. Beside him stood Sabrina Monroe, tall, impossibly beautiful, dressed in a gown that shimmered like moonlight. She leaned into Ethan, possessive, her laughter as cold as the diamonds at her throat. Ethan raised his glass slightly toward Lilah in mock greeting, the gesture dripping with quiet cruelty. There was no warmth in it. This wasn't a reunion. This was a performance, and she was the uninvited guest of honor. Every part of Lilah screamed to turn and leave, to run back to Willow Creek, to the comfort of familiar streets and soft flowers. But something steadied her. The memory of who she used to be, the girl who believed in herself, and the boy Ethan once was, before ambition and arrogance buried him beneath layers of privilege. She stepped deeper into the ballroom, the heels she'd borrowed clicking softly against polished marble, her heart thudding a reckless rhythm. She didn't belong here, but she'd be damned if she let them see her fall apart. The night had just begun, and though Ethan thought this was his game, Lilah was about to learn she had a strength even he couldn't predict. The ghosts of the past stirred between the glitter and gold, and for the first time in years, Lilah Hartley wasn't running anymore. She was ready. The reception shimmered like a dream Lilah never asked for. Laughter danced between towering crystal vases, champagne flutes caught the glimmering light, and violins wept delicate notes into the gilded air. Lilah Hartley lingered near the edge of the ballroom, her fingers brushing nervously against the stem of her untouched glass, feeling more like a shadow than a guest. She told herself she could slip out soon, stay for an hour, just enough to satisfy whatever curiosity had driven her here. Then she'd vanish into the city, onto a train, back to Willow Creek, where flowers and open skies were kinder than the sharp eyes around her. But fate, or rather Ethan Caldwell, had other plans. A sudden hush fell over the room as Ethan, flawless in his black suit and ice blue tie, made his way toward the stage. The chandeliers cast halos over him, the kind of glow reserved for men like him. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. He flashed a smile that belonged on magazine covers and accepted the microphone with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice a velvet blade that cut through the murmurs. "Before we continue this unforgettable night, I'd like to take a moment to honor someone very special." Lilah's stomach twisted. He wouldn't. Not here. Not like this. But he did. His eyes found hers in the crowd, cold, gleaming, and for a fleeting moment, conflicted. He raised his glass slightly. "A person from my past. Someone who knew Alshurum." Guests turned their heads, curious and eager for gossip. "Lilah Hartley," he called, his voice ringing out. "Would you mind joining us up here?" The words struck like a slap. Her pulse roared in her ears. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to run. But her feet moved forward, driven by something stronger than fear. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Heads turned as she crossed the ballroom, whispers trailing in her wake like a cruel perfume. Who is she? Is she wearing that? Country girl. How quaint. The stage lights blinded her as she stepped beside him. She felt small against the glimmering backdrop and Sabrina's predatory smile. Ethan placed a hand on her back, guiding her to face the crowd. "This," he said smoothly, "is Lilah. We went to high school together, back when my biggest dream was getting out of Willow Creek and leaving behind." Well, he laughed and so did the crowd. Simpler times. His words were silk, but the edges cut deep, compliments laced with venom. She always had this way about her. So pure, so wholesome. Still does, clearly, he added with a glance at her plain blue dress, and another round of polite chuckles followed. The subtext was clear. Look how far I've come. Look where she stayed. Lilah's cheeks burned, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst from her chest. But she met the crowd's smug, painted faces with calm eyes, refusing to let her pain show. "I just wanted to take a moment to remind myself," Ethan continued, voice smooth as glass, "of where I started, because it makes me appreciate where I am now, with the beautiful Sabrina by my side." Sabrina's arms snaked around his, flashing her diamond ring for the crowd, her grin sharp as glass. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Lilah didn't flinch. She forced her lips into a soft, measured smile. She would not break here, not in front of them, not for him. "Thank you, Ethan," she said quietly, the steadiness in her voice surprising even herself. "It's nice to know some people still remember where they came from." The words landed heavier than expected. For the briefest second, Ethan's mask faltered. Something flickered in those blue eyes, a shadow of the boy he'd once been, before money and power hardened him. The crowd only heard her words as polite acceptance, but Ethan felt it like a quiet blow to his chest. As Lilah stepped off the stage, her vow formed silently within her. Never again would she let herself be small, be dismissed, or humiliated. Not by him, not by anyone. Unseen by the crowd, Ethan's gaze lingered on her retreating figure. Something tight, almost painful, twisting in his chest. He tried to shake it off, but the ache didn't leave. And somewhere deep inside, a long-forgotten corner of his heart whispered a warning. What if you just made the biggest mistake of your life? The night had grown heavy with the weight of whispered scandals and artificial smiles. As the party spun on in the grand ballroom, with laughter chiming like hollow bells and champagne flowing like liquid gold, Lilah Hartley slipped through the towering glass doors onto the balcony, seeking air, space, anything to escape the suffocating glitz of a world that wasn't hers. The city stretched out before her in a glittering tapestry of lights. Towers of glass and steel rose like monuments to ambition, and somewhere in that endless glow, she thought of Willow Creek, the scent of fresh earth, wildflowers in bloom, the quiet kind of night where you could hear the crickets sing. Her fingers curled around the cold marble of the balcony rail. She needed to leave. Now before the ache inside her settled into something permanent, but just as she turned, the sound of footsteps made her freeze. Ethan Caldwell emerged from the shadows, the soft city glow catching the sharp angles of his face. His blue eyes, usually so cold and unyielding, reflected the thousand lights of New York like tiny fractured stars. There was no crowd here, no cameras, no Sabrina, Just him and her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan let out a dry, humorless laugh. Running off so soon, Lilah? His voice carried the same smooth arrogance it always had. But underneath it, there was a tremor, a hesitation. Lilah stiffened, but didn't step back. I've seen enough, she replied quietly, meeting his gaze. He crossed his arms, leaning casually against the rail, trying to keep his mask in place. You still living that small-town life? Flower shops, pie contests, church picnics? His words dripped with mockery, but his eyes betrayed him. Searching, restless, unsure. I am, Lilah answered, calm and steady. It's not the life you wanted, I know. But it's honest. It's kind. He scoffed, though it sounded hollow. Kindness doesn't get you penthouses or magazine covers. It doesn't win. Lilah looked back at the city, her voice soft but unshaken. Maybe not, but it lets you sleep at night. That silenced him. For a beat, the only sound between them was the hum of the city far below. Then his voice cracked. Just barely, but enough. Why'd you even come, Lilah? He asked, not quite looking at her. Was it curiosity? Pity? Did you want to see what you missed out on? She turned toward him, her heart pounding, not from fear but from old unhealed wounds. Her words came out gentle but unflinching. I came because, once, a long time ago, I loved you, Ethan. I believed in you. In the boy who talked about building tree houses, not skyscrapers, who wanted to plant apple trees behind his house, who said he'd never forget where he came from. She drew in a breath. I guess I just hoped that boy was still in there somewhere, even if it was foolish. The words landed like stones. Ethan's jaw tightened, a flash of guilt clawing at his chest. An emotion so unfamiliar it made his carefully built world tremble. For years he'd built walls of glass and steel around his heart, bearing anything soft, anything weak. But Lilah's quiet honesty cracked those walls, letting something raw and aching slip through. He wanted to scoff, to push her away with cruel words, to retreat into the safety of indifference. But he couldn't. You're a fool, Lilah, he said, though it lacked venom. She smiled sadly, that same unshaken grace she'd carried in high school still shining through. I know. She turned to leave, her soft floral scent lingering in the cool night air. Ethan didn't stop her. Couldn't. He stayed there, staring out at the lights, feeling a weight he couldn't name settle in his chest. For the first time in years, the empire he'd built felt empty. His confidence wavered, the boy she'd believed in. He wasn't sure if he'd killed him off completely or if he was still buried somewhere beneath all the power, money, and pride. As the door clicked shut behind her, a thought gnawed at him. What if letting her go was the worst thing he'd ever done? The days following the reception seemed to move in a strange, hollow blur. The city buzzed around Lilah Hartley, but she floated through it like a ghost, a stranger among glittering strangers. She should have left already. She should have packed her small suitcase and boarded the first bus back to Willow Creek. Back to the world of daisy chains, weathered porches, and sunsets that didn't come with a skyline. But something kept her here. Maybe it was the unresolved ache Ethan had unknowingly stirred. Or maybe it was the sense that this chapter of her life wasn't finished yet. That feeling sharpened one evening, when Lilah found herself wandering the endless halls of the luxury hotel where the wedding would take place. Everything shimmered. Gold-plated frames, velvet drapes, crystal light fixtures. It was too much, almost comically grand. Lilah was just about to turn toward the elevators when a voice stopped her. Sharp, cold, and far too familiar. Sabrina Monroe, the fiancée. Lilah froze, pressing herself against the wall by a partially open suite door. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something about Sabrina's tone prickled her skin. I told you, Sabrina hissed into the phone, her voice a venomous whisper. It's all set. 2 more days and I'll have his ring and his fortune. Half of everything, maybe more. He's too stupid to see through me. Lilah's breath caught. I don't give a damn about Ethan, Sabrina continued, her words slicing through the air like icy daggers. He's a wallet with a pulse. After the wedding, I'll bleed him dry and vanish. You and I will finally be set, baby. The laughter that followed made Lilah's stomach turn. She clamped a hand over her mouth. Every instinct screamed for her to storm in, to call her out. But reason and heartache tangled in her chest. This wasn't just anyone. This was Ethan, the man who'd publicly humiliated her, mocked her, discarded her like she never mattered. Would he even believe her if she told him? Would it be worth it after what he'd done? Lilah's heart and pride collided like crashing waves. Why should she save him? Why should she spare him from the woman he chose over her? The one he held high in front of a room of strangers, while degrading Lilah's name? Tears stung her eyes. Not from sorrow, but fury. Fury at herself, for still caring, for even hesitating. But another voice inside, the one that sounded a lot like the girl she used to be, whispered, "It's not about him. It's about what kind of woman you are." She knew Ethan had changed, but maybe he deserved to know the truth. Lilah backed away from the door, her pulse racing. Her mind raced with options. She could leave right now, keep the secret buried, and let karma deliver the blow. It would be justice. Sweet, silent justice. Or she could warn him, even if he hated her for it, even if it meant reliving the sting of his cruel smirks and careless words. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, uneven breaths. The war inside her was louder than the city traffic beyond those windows. She swallowed hard, wiping at the corners of her eyes. This wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't even about him. It was about her. The kind of person she refused to let this city, this night, or Ethan Caldwell turn her into. Lilah took a step forward. She wasn't sure yet what she would say, or if she had the courage to face him. But she knew one thing. She couldn't stand by while someone else played with a heart, even one as hardened as Ethan's, the same way he'd once played with hers. The weight of the decision settled on Lilah Hartley like a stone. Every second that passed, she could feel it sinking deeper into her chest. The knowledge that she had to act, that she had to do something that would either mend the remnants of her broken heart or tear everything apart completely. It was late in the evening when Lilah found Ethan again, alone in the grand ballroom. The party was winding down, but his figure still stood at the center of the room, casting a long, solitary shadow against the polished marble floors. His back was turned, a drink in his hand, but Lilah could tell his thoughts were far away. And he wasn't the only one lost in his mind. She, too, had been struggling to find peace with the truth she'd overheard. The truth that had shattered everything she thought she knew about Ethan and his fiancée. Lilah approached him slowly, the soft click of her heels the only sound breaking the silence between them. He turned as he heard her, his eyes narrowing in cautious recognition. "What do you want?" Ethan asked, his voice colder than she remembered, but there was something beneath it, something worn and tired. She held her breath, the recording of Sabrina's call clutched tightly in her palm. She could feel its presence burning in her hand, urging her to speak, to end this madness, to save him from himself. "I need to show you something," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. Ethan raised an eyebrow, but the weariness in his posture suggested that, for once, he was willing to listen. He placed the drink on the nearest table and crossed his arms. "This better be good." Lilah didn't waste any more time. She pressed play, the muffled voice of Sabrina filling the space between them. As the words cut through the air, Ethan's face shifted from skepticism to disbelief. "2 more days and I'll have him," Sabrina's voice sneered through the speakers, her tone dripping with venom. "Half of everything. He's an idiot. Doesn't even know what's coming." Lilah watched Ethan carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in his expression as he listened. The walls he'd built up, the ones he'd constructed with layers of money and power, started to crumble before her eyes. "And after the wedding, I'll bleed him dry. You and I will have everything we want," Sabrina continued, her laugh a chilling sound that reverberated in Lilah's ears. By the time the recording ended, silence enveloped them. Ethan stood completely still, his jaw clenched, his blue eyes wide and haunted. Lilah could see it now, the way he was beginning to unravel. The man who had once seemed so invincible, so confident in his wealth and success, was finally seeing the truth about the woman he had believed was perfect for him, the woman he had chosen over her. He didn't speak at first. His eyes flicked to the ground, then back to Lilah. The words were slow to come, heavy with something she hadn't seen in him before. Shame. You? You knew? He asked, his voice unsteady. All this time? Lilah nodded, her eyes never leaving his. I overheard her, Ethan. I couldn't just walk away, not when I knew what kind of person she really is. For a long moment, Ethan didn't say anything. The world seemed to hold its breath. His expression was unreadable, but Lilah could see the internal battle waging within him. The man who had built his empire on control, on power, on manipulation, was now staring into the face of his own vulnerability. Finally he spoke, his voice a broken whisper. Why would you help me, after everything I did to you? Lilah's throat tightened, the lump in it too hard to swallow. She took a slow step closer to him, her gaze soft but resolute. Because despite everything you've done, I still care about you. I always did. You were someone I believed in, even when you didn't believe in me. And you're not the man I thought you were, Ethan. But maybe, just maybe, you still have the chance to be that man again. Her words hit him like a punch, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of her kindness sink in. He wanted to push her away, to scoff at her naivete, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Not when he saw himself for the first time. Not the millionaire. Not the successful man, but the person he had become. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell saw his reflection. It was not the powerful businessman he'd become, but a man so consumed with ambition and pride that he had lost sight of who he really was. The boy who used to care about the small things. The boy who used to care about people. Regret crushed him. He had humiliated her. He had cast her aside. And yet, despite all of that, Lilah still chose to protect him. I've been so blind, he muttered, the words almost inaudible. His blue eyes darkened, clouded with guilt. I'm not who I thought I was, and I've lost everything that truly mattered. Lilah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him that he could redeem himself, that he could change, but another part of her knew it was up to him. He had to make the choice. The man standing before her wasn't the Ethan she once knew. He wasn't the carefree boy who held her hand under the stars, promising a life that never came. But maybe, just maybe, he could still become someone worthy of her forgiveness. You have to decide, Ethan, she said softly. You have the power to change this, to make it right. But it's not just about her. It's about you. You have to want to be a better man. His gaze never left hers, and in that moment, something in him stirred, a faint spark of hope. The man who had been driven by success, by wealth, now had a chance to rebuild. But it was up to him. He finally nodded, a hint of resolve in his eyes. I will, I promise. The morning of Ethan Caldwell's wedding dawned bright and cold. The sky over New York's skyline, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside the grand ballroom. The guests, dressed in their finest attire, were milling about with champagne flutes in hand, enjoying the lavish atmosphere, unaware that the day would take a turn none of them could have expected. Behind the scenes, the final preparations for what was supposed to be the most important day in Ethan's life were underway. Yet everything, from the flowers to the wedding dress, now felt like an elaborate charade. The air was thick with tension as Ethan stood in front of the grand mirror, his fingers gripping the edges of the marble countertop. His reflection stared back at him, not the confident millionaire, but a man stripped bare, vulnerable, and questioning everything he had built his life upon. The weight of the decision he had made the night before, the choice to cancel the wedding, pressed down on him like 1,000 pounds. Yet as the minutes passed, he realized that it was the only choice he had left. Ethan's blue eyes stared into his reflection, the guilt from last night's confrontation with Lilah still eating at him. He couldn't pretend anymore, not to himself, and certainly not to anyone else. The sound of his phone vibrating against the table snapped him out of his reverie. He glanced at it, and his stomach sank. It was a text from Sabrina. Are you ready? Everything's in place. You better not back out now. He hesitated, his fingers trembling over the screen. For a fleeting moment, he considered going through with it, going back to the life he had built with Sabrina. The money, the power, the status. But then he remembered her words from last night, the cruel, heartless plans to take everything from him. He remembered what he had overheard, the woman he was about to marry, the woman he thought he loved, was nothing more than a gold digger. With a deep breath, he hit reply and typed the words he never thought he'd say. The wedding is off. As the text sent, Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He felt both liberated and terrified. The decision had been made, but the consequences were yet to unfold. He turned to face the door, stepping toward the entrance. His mind made up. It was time to face Sabrina. The ballroom buzzed with excitement and laughter as the guests took their seats, eagerly awaiting the ceremony. The soft strains of a string quartet filled the air, but none of them could have known what was coming next. Sabrina Monroe, standing at the entrance in her pristine white gown, looked every bit the picture of a perfect bride. But her eyes flicked nervously toward the back of the room, expecting Ethan to make his grand entrance any moment. When she saw him standing at the front of the room with a microphone in hand, her face contorted into an expression of confusion and then fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's voice rang out, clear and firm, silencing the chatter that filled the air. "I have an announcement to make." Sabrina's heart skipped a beat. She felt a sinking sensation in her stomach as she locked eyes with Ethan, realizing that something was very wrong. Ethan took a deep breath, glancing down at the small slip of paper in his hand. His eyes met Sabrina's, and the crowd fell silent in anticipation. "I'm calling off the wedding," he said, his voice unwavering. The words hit like a bolt of lightning. The room froze, a collective gasp echoing through the hall. Sabrina's face went white with shock. For a moment, she could do nothing but stare at him, the reality of what was happening crashing down upon her. "What?" Sabrina hissed, her voice barely above a whisper, but Ethan heard it. His heart, still pounding from his decision, didn't falter. "You heard me," he said, his voice louder now, the weight of his words carrying throughout the ballroom. "I've come to realize something I should have known all along. I've been blind. I've been living a lie." Sabrina's face twisted with rage. She stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. "What the hell are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising in anger. "This is absurd, Ethan. We have everything we need, our future, our life, together. You can't do this." But Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. "You never cared about me, Sabrina. You only cared about what you could take from me, and for that, I can never forgive you." Gasps filled the room as the truth finally dawned on the guests. Sabrina's mask of sweetness and charm had been shattered. Ethan turned to face the crowd, his voice firm. "This wedding is a farce. I refuse to marry someone who doesn't love me, who only wanted to use me for my money. Sabrina Monroe is not the woman I thought she was, and I'm not the man I want to be with her." Sabrina stood frozen, her chest heaving with rage, but she knew she had lost. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief and shock as people began to leave, the air charged with tension and confusion. Ethan didn't wait for another word from her. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the ballroom, his footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Lilah, who had been standing in the back of the room, had tried to slip away unnoticed. But something in Ethan's voice, in the sheer power of his words, stopped her in her tracks. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be the one to make the bold move, to break free from the shackles of his own pride and arrogance. Her heart raced, but she couldn't stay in the ballroom. She couldn't stand to watch the man she once loved unravel in front of everyone. She made her way toward the back exit, desperate to escape the scene, to process everything that had just unfolded. But just as she was about to leave, she spotted Ethan standing at the balcony, the same one where they had shared their last peaceful memory together in high school. The city lights shimmered below them as she stepped out into the cool night air. Ethan turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes were filled with a raw mixture of exhaustion and relief. "I never thought I'd be standing here again," he said, his voice soft. His gaze searched hers, as if looking for something. Lilah took a deep breath, her chest tight. I didn't think I'd be here either, she whispered, her heart beating faster in her chest. Ethan stepped toward her, his voice low and sincere. I made a huge mistake, Lilah. I should have never let you go. I should have never chosen that life. I see that now. Her eyes searched his, searching for the man she once knew, the boy who had held her hand through their teenage years. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Ethan, she replied, her voice shaky. But what you did today, it was brave. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way back to who you really are. Ethan's eyes softened, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. I hope I can, Lilah. I really hope I can. The cool night air hung thick with the scent of rain, the city lights flickering like distant stars as Ethan and Lilah stood together on the balcony. For the first time in a long time, the chaotic sounds of the city below felt like background noise, irrelevant to the intensity of the moment unfolding between them. The weight of years of mistakes, of misunderstandings, seemed to hang in the space between them, waiting to be addressed. Ethan turned to face her, his blue eyes clouded with uncertainty. For so long he had built a wall around his heart, using his success, his wealth, and his power as shields to protect himself from the vulnerability he had once known so freely. But now, standing before the only person who had ever truly known him, the person he had hurt the most, that wall was crumbling. I don't know where to begin, he said, his voice quieter than usual, filled with a rawness that surprised both of them. The confident millionaire who had stood in front of boardrooms and made life-altering decisions now felt small, almost fragile. The man who had once stood tall, above everyone else, now found himself facing the one woman who could bring him to his knees. Lilah didn't respond immediately. Her heart, already battered by years of confusion, hurt, and betrayal, was at a loss for words. She had spent years trying to forget the boy who had once been her world, the boy who had whispered promises of forever in the quiet moments of their youth. But no matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she tried to bury her memories, they always found their way back to him. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling, why did you leave me? Why did you choose this life over us? Ethan closed his eyes, the pain of that question hitting him harder than any criticism or betrayal he had faced in his career. He had always thought that success would bring him happiness. He had always believed that wealth, status, and power would fill the emptiness he had felt after leaving her behind. But now, standing here, it felt like none of it had ever mattered. I was selfish, he admitted, his voice cracking with the weight of the truth. I thought I had to prove something. To everyone. To my family. To myself. I didn't see what I had until it was too late. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he wasn't the millionaire with an empire. He was just Ethan, the boy who used to give her daisies by the river, the boy who had once promised her the world. Lilah felt her chest tighten as tears began to well up in her eyes. She had never truly allowed herself to cry over him, never fully allowed herself to mourn the loss of what could have been. But in this moment, hearing him speak from the heart, she couldn't hold it in anymore. The walls she had built around her own heart cracked wide open. I never stopped caring about you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never stopped loving you, not for the man you became, but for the boy you used to be. The boy who would hold my hand and promise me we'd always be together. I don't know what happened to him, Ethan, but I know I never stopped wishing he would come back. Ethan's chest tightened at her words, the guilt he had been carrying for years flooding back with overwhelming force. The boy he used to be, the boy who had promised her everything, had been buried under layers of ambition and greed. And now, standing here with Lilah, he realized that the boy he had left behind was still the only part of him that mattered, the part he had lost along the way. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't realize how much I had lost until I saw you again. And now I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Lilah shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She reached out, gently touching his arm. You don't have to deserve it, Ethan, she said softly. You're human. You made mistakes. We both did. But this moment right here, this honesty, it's all that matters now. The silence between them deepened as they stood there, neither one sure of what to say next. The weight of their past, their mistakes, and their lost time hung heavily in the air. But for the first time in years, there was no anger, no resentment, just a fragile understanding. Ethan stepped closer to her, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for hers. He had spent so many years living in a world of control and calculated decisions, but now standing before the woman he had once loved, he realized that control meant nothing in the face of raw emotion. "Lilah," he murmured, his voice a little unsteady, "I don't know where this goes. I don't know if we can fix everything that's been broken between us. But I know I want to try. I want to be better. For you, for me, for us." Lilah's heart swelled, a mixture of hope and caution blooming within her. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that trust was something that couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But in this moment, with him standing there, vulnerable and open in a way he never had been before, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. The possibility of a future that wasn't defined by their past mistakes. "I don't know if I can, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I'm willing to see where this takes us. I'm willing to try." The words hung between them, fragile yet full of possibility. And in that quiet, tender moment, something shifted. It wasn't the promise of perfection, but the promise of a chance to rebuild what had been broken, to rediscover the love that had once burned so brightly. Ethan took her hand, his heart racing. But this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of hope. Hope that maybe they could find their way back to each other, no matter how long it took. The sun was setting over the city, casting a soft golden glow over the streets of New York. The skyscrapers seemed to fade into the horizon, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the city that never truly stopped. Ethan stood by the cafe window, his hands nervously wrapped around a cup of coffee, his blue eyes scanning the bustling street. He wasn't the man who had once stood at the center of this city, commanding power and wealth. Today he was just a man waiting for a chance to prove that he could be something different. Lilah had agreed to meet him again, but not in the way he had hoped. There were no grand gestures this time, no fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. She had asked for simplicity, and he had agreed. Today was about starting fresh, not as the millionaire and the florist, but as two people trying to rediscover the connection they had once shared. The door to the cafe opened, and Lilah stepped inside, her presence a soft but undeniable force. She wore a simple flowing dress, and her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders like a curtain of sunlight. She was beautiful, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, a confidence born not from the external world, but from within. As she walked toward him, Ethan felt his heart skip a beat, but this time, it wasn't because of the world he had built. It was because of her, the woman who had once been his everything. "Hi," she said, her voice warm but guarded. She sat across from him, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. There was no trace of the girl who had once been unsure of her place in the world. She had changed, and Ethan knew he had to prove he had too. "Hi," Ethan replied, his smile soft. It wasn't the confident grin of the man who had once been untouchable. It was a smile full of hope, vulnerability, and an understanding that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They sat in silence for a few moments, each of them unsure of what to say. The awkwardness wasn't uncomfortable, though. It felt familiar, like two old friends trying to reconnect after years apart. Slowly, the conversation began to flow. First about the small things, the weather, the city, the coffee. But then as they spoke, something shifted. There was an honesty in their words, a quiet kind of vulnerability that allowed them to open up in ways they hadn't before. "I've missed this," Ethan said softly, his voice low. "Talking like we used to, without all the distractions." Lilah nodded, her eyes meeting his with a softness he hadn't seen in years. "I've missed it too, but we're not the same people we were back then, Ethan. I think you've realized that." Ethan's heart clenched, but he didn't shy away from her words. "I have. I've changed, Lilah. I've learned the hard way that money and success don't mean anything if you lose the people who matter most. And I lost you, because I was too blind to see what I had." Lilah looked at him, her gaze steady and unyielding. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. She had been hurt, deeply, but she wasn't afraid to face him now. You did lose me, but not just because of your money. You lost me because you stopped being the person I fell in love with. You let ambition consume you, and you forgot what really mattered. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He knew she was right. He had been consumed by the very things he thought would make him happy, only to realize that the emptiness he had been trying to fill was something that couldn't be bought. He had lost himself in the process. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice filled with remorse. "I can't change the past, but I want to make things right. I don't know if I deserve another chance, but if you'll let me, I'd like to start over. Not as a millionaire, but as the man who's trying to find himself again." Lilah sat back, her arms folded across her chest as she considered his words. The old Lilah would have run at the first sign of hurt, the first taste of betrayal. But this was a new version of her, one who had learned to stand her ground and protect her heart. She wasn't ready to dive back into the deep end just yet, but she was willing to see where this could go. "I think I'm ready to start over too," she said, her voice steady. "But no grand gestures, Ethan. No castles or fancy dinners. I want to see the real you, the one who still finds joy in simple things. Let's take this slow, okay?" Ethan's heart lifted at her words. Slowly, cautiously, he reached across the table and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but to him it meant everything. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, and he wasn't asking for her to erase the past. He was just asking for a chance to prove that he could be the man she once loved. And maybe, just maybe, the man she could love again. "I'll take whatever time you need," Ethan promised, his voice earnest. "I'll prove to you, every day, that I'm worth the chance." Lilah smiled, a small, cautious smile, but a smile nonetheless. The walls she had built around her heart were starting to crumble, piece by piece, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. As they left the cafe and walked into the crisp night air, the city around them buzzed with life, but it felt like everything had slowed down, just for them. They were no longer the people they had been years ago, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe this time, they could start over, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The seasons had changed since that first day they met again in the coffee shop, their lives slowly weaving back together, one day at a time. New York City, with all its glitz and glamour, had faded into the background of their lives. The noise, the crowds, and the towering buildings no longer held the same significance they once did. Now, it was the little moments, the quiet mornings, the stolen glances, the laughter over simple meals, that mattered most. Lilah had taken a leap of faith when she agreed to give Ethan another chance, and with each passing day her heart opened a little more, learning to trust him again. Ethan, for his part, worked hard to prove that the man she once loved was still there, buried under the layers of ambition and pride. He'd thrown away the wealth, the power, the empire, or at least he no longer let them define him. It had started with small steps. They spent weekends wandering through parks, visiting farmers' markets, or taking long walks along the river that had once been the backdrop to their youthful promises. Each step brought them closer to the people they were now, and the people they had been, before the world had tried to tear them apart. But for Ethan, there was something missing, something he had yet to offer Lilah. His love for her had never been about material things. It was never about the lavish gifts or extravagant gestures. He had learned that the hard way. But there was one thing he could offer her, a gift that held more meaning than any diamond ring or fancy house ever could. It was an early spring afternoon when Ethan asked Lilah to meet him at the small, quiet flower shop he had purchased on the edge of town. It wasn't a grand location, but it held a certain charm, much like the woman who stood at its heart. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air as she walked in, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the little shop. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice soft with surprise. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "This is for you. For us." He stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, chasing things that I thought would make me happy. But the truth is, the only thing I ever needed was right in front of me. You. Lilah, I want to spend my life with you, not because of what I can give you, but because of who I've become because of you. Lilah blinked, her heart fluttering with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Ethan, you've already given me so much. I don't need anything more. But Ethan's eyes were full of sincerity. You've taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or wealth. It's about being there, in the quiet moments, through the good and the bad. And I want to continue building those moments with you. Will you marry me, Lilah? Not as a millionaire, but as a man who loves you more than anything. Lilah's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this moment would come. She had never expected Ethan to humble himself in this way, but here he was, the man who had once been full of arrogance, now standing before her with nothing but honesty and love in his eyes. And for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of his past, only the sincerity of his heart. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will marry you." In that moment, the world felt perfect. It wasn't about the ring or the flowers or the promises that were so often broken. It was about the man who had finally found his soul and the woman who had loved him through the darkness, even when he didn't deserve it. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy. They planned their wedding with the same simplicity and love that had come to define their relationship. No grand ceremonies or lavish venues, just a small gathering of the people who had truly mattered. And on the day of their wedding, as Lilah walked down the aisle, Ethan's heart swelled with pride. She was his equal, his partner, his love, and he had earned the privilege of standing by her side. Their wedding was intimate, filled with laughter, and surrounded by the beauty of nature. As they exchanged vows, they promised not just to love each other, but to be present for each other in every moment. There were no diamonds or extravagant decorations, only the truth of their love, unadorned and raw. The sun set over the horizon as they walked hand in hand along the riverbank, the same place where their love had begun. The world around them was quiet, save for the sound of the water gently flowing beside them. There were no titles, no riches, no expectations. Just Ethan and Lilah together, finally at peace. "I never imagined this would be our story," Lilah whispered, her head resting against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Neither did I, but I wouldn't change a thing." And as they stood there watching the sky turn to shades of pink and purple, they knew their journey had just begun. It wasn't about the past or the mistakes they had made along the way. It was about the future they were building together, one day at a time, hand in hand, a new beginning, born from love, understanding, and the quiet joy of finally finding home.